the frontman in Moscow's negotiations with NATO and Belgrade. He's used Moscow's influence in Yugoslavia to persuade the Serbs to accept NATO's terms. But at what cost to Russia's ties with the West? Moscow has worked successfully with NATO in Bosnia for the last 3 years. Now a new Russian force looks set to join NATO in Kosovo, but perhaps only to expose the cracks in an increasingly fractured relationship. An edgy peace is returning to the Balkans, and in Russia a new mood is forming. The post-Cold War flirtation with the West is losing some of its appeal. Moscow is taking stock of its options and reassessing its national interests. Kosovo may mark a turning point in Russian diplomacy. Robert Parsons, BBC News, Moscow.
Just who goes first? The Americans demand to lead the UN force into Kosovo.
Already on their way, Russian troops cross the Serbian border.
Just a peacekeeping force into Kosovo. British troops who've been waiting on the Macedonian border for weeks had planned to spearhead the push into Pristina at dawn tomorrow. But America is demanding that US Marines, who are only just arriving, should be the first to cross the border. Sources say that British troops have now been placed on immediate notice to move. That's in response to reports that Russian troops are already on their way. They've crossed into Serbia from Bosnia, intent on being the first to arrive in Kosovo. Well, Sky's David Chater is with the British contingent in Macedonia.
The vanguard suddenly turned into the rearguard today as the best laid plans of Britain's military men were back on the drawing board. The White House is now calling the shots, and the American Marines will be first into Kosovo. Their main contingent has been in Macedonia less than 24 hours. KFOR's commander, General Sir Mike Jackson, said his men were under no illusions they were facing a safe environment in Kosovo. It's a risk they won't be able to eliminate. The situation in the first few hours and days will be very volatile. At KFOR headquarters, the British troops were still on a 4-hour standby. Most of them have been here for 3 months.
We are now poised in our final assembly area, ready to go forward. We are waiting now for our final orders from KFOR to move into Kosovo.
Well, we've been sat here for quite a while now, so at least things are rolling and we're going to get something done.
The American decision has handed KFOR's commander a bouquet of barbed wire, but relations seemed cordial on the surface today as the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, was greeted on her arrival by General Sir Mike Jackson. There's no doubt now the American flag has been raised on the operation, the aim, political capital in Washington. David Chater, Sky News, Macedonia.
President Clinton's message to the Serbs: until Milosevic goes, you're on your own.
As long as he remains in power, as long as your nation is ruled by an indicted war criminal, we will provide no support for the reconstruction of Serbia.
Accusations that Clinton is manipulating the peacekeeping initiative for his own political ends have made the exact timing of the push into Kosovo unclear. But whether the US leads the way or not, the plan for European troops remains the same. Phase 1, the first 12 hours, will see them take Kačanik, the main town across the border from Macedonia. In Phase 2, which could take up to 2 days, they hope to secure mountain regions around the town. When that's achieved, they'll start moving the bulk of KFOR into the rest of Kosovo. And by day 10, NATO should be ready to divide the province into 5 sectors, the largest and central sector under the control of British troops. Americans, Germans, French and Italians will patrol the other areas, with the Russian force, not under direct NATO command, in northeast Kosovo. It's been confirmed that the first group of Russian troops has already crossed into Yugoslavia from neighboring Bosnia. This morning in Moscow, Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov met America's special envoy to the Balkans to discuss Russia's contribution.
We're going to move forward together here. That isn't to prejudge what the nature and arrangements will be for Russian participation in KFOR, nor is Russia decided categorically that it is going to be part of KFOR. We hope that it will.
But President Yeltsin is insisting there's no thawing in relations between Russia and NATO over the Kosovo campaign. Mark Smith.
The first Russian troops to join the Kosovo peacekeeping force have rolled into Yugoslavia from Bosnia well ahead of their NATO counterparts. A convoy of soldiers, troop transporters, lorries and jeeps have been driving along the motorway into Belgrade in the past half an hour on their way to Kosovo. Information is still sketchy and unconfirmed, but Interfax, the Russian news agency, is saying that another 1,000 Russian peacekeeping forces are at Russian airfields ready to be flown into Kosovo, including the capital Pristina, later today. Meanwhile, plans to move large numbers of NATO troops into Kosovo appear to be delayed. NATO leaders are playing down speculation that they've been caused by squabbling over which country should be seen to lead the advance force into Kosovo. In response, the United States Vice President Al Gore has told American television that the Russians are not going to enter Kosovo until arrangements had been reached within a unified command. It's thought NATO will move across the border tomorrow. Meanwhile, a United States delegation has left Moscow without resolving differences over Russia's participation in the international peacekeeping force.
The Russians are coming. While NATO waits, this armoured column of Russian troops from Bosnia passed through the outskirts of Belgrade, destination unknown, but bound presumably for Kosovo. That much was clear from their insignia. As they waited on the motorway outside Belgrade, the emblems from Bosnia's S4 force freshly repainted with the K4 for Kosovo. A row was clearly brewing earlier in Moscow when the Americans' chief troubleshooter, Strobe Talbot's talks broke up in disagreement over what role Russian troops would play in Kosovo. Moscow is insisting on its own sector in Kosovo under separate command.
If this agreement is not reached, Russia has the same right as NATO, especially bearing in mind our decisive role in achieving the resolution and a halt to military activity. We shall announce a sector that will be agreed upon with the Yugoslav side and will meet our interests.
The threat of Russian troops entering Kosovo unilaterally has cast a new shadow over NATO's own preparations. The US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright arrived in Macedonia to meet American troops, as NATO was forced to deny that its delayed entry into Kosovo was caused by a dispute over whose troops would be the first to move in. What was hoped to be a triumphant flag-waving NATO operation to reclaim Kosovo is looking more like an unseemly squabble over whose flag would be waved. Jim Fish, BBC News.
Well, in an interview with American television, US Vice President Al Gore had this to say over reports of Russian troops apparently heading for Kosovo. Well, if we don't have the pictures, let me tell you what he did say just before we go to the pictures. He said they haven't entered Kosovo and they've given us assurances they're not going to enter Kosovo. That's what Al Gore is telling ABC. Let's hear what he has to say.
They haven't entered Kosovo, and they've given us assurances that they're not going to enter Kosovo, at least not until arrangements have been worked out for their participation under agreed terms within a unified command. We've been in touch with the Russians. We've received absolute assurances on that. The international forces, the so-called K4 forces, will arrive there very soon, and we have seen evidence now that the Serbs really are withdrawing on the schedule that they agreed to. Of course, we're going to monitor it and make sure that they do, but so far, so good.
At the moment, we're seeing an armoured column flying Russian flags with K4 insignia on the side of their vehicles.
Well, we know that those vehicles are certainly, they are equipped with those types of vehicles. The contingent is within S4, and when they departed this morning, they were traveling in armored personnel carriers, jeeps, and trucks.
All right, Colonel Hockman, many thanks indeed to you for that. Let me just reiterate, as we looked at these pictures, he's making it clear that he's had talks. Madeleine Albright had already spoken with the Russian Foreign Minister, Igor Ivanov, about the movements of the Serbs withdrawing and indeed the Russian troops being deployed. They haven't entered Kosovo, and they've given us assurances they're not going to enter Kosovo.